Hello, welcome to 70 Years, 70 Muppets, More Muppets Please, a Muppet fan podcast presented by ToughPigs.com. This is the podcast where we celebrate the Muppets' 70th anniversary with a series of spotlights on our favorite Muppet characters, from fan favorites to the most obscure. I am this week's host, Drake Lucas, and the Muppets of the week are Wilkins and Wontkins, performed by Jane Henson and Jim Henson, and designed by Jim Henson, making their world debut in 1957. In the beginning, Jim Henson was an ad man. Well, almost the beginning. First, there was Sam and Friends, the DC area TV puppet show that Jim created and performed with his partner, Jane. The success and edgy creativity of the show caught the eye of executives at Wilkins Coffee, and in 1957, they asked him to design TV ads for their product. Wilkins Coffee had started out as a coffee shop in 1900 and was a popular wholesale provider by 1950, serving local restaurants and hotels across the DC area. They initially commissioned 3 10-second ads, and in the end, Jim created around 200 ads for them. The characters are simple. Wilkins is a cute, sadistic puppet with a perpetual smile who repeatedly tortures and murders Wontkins, a blobby and grumpy yet somehow lovable puppet whose fatal flaw is not drinking Wilkins coffee. Jane puppeteered Wilkins, and Jim puppeteered Wontkins, while doing the voice for both, some of his first voice work. The arrangement made sense given that Jim, like the unfortunate Wontkins, didn't care for coffee. Most spots followed the same formula. Wilkins asks Wontkins if he drinks Wilkins coffee, Wontkins defiantly doesn't, and Wilkins then kills him before turning to the camera to say something that makes sure you got the message, followed by a 2-second silent product shot. How does Wilkins kill him, or at least severely injure him? So many ways. Stabbed, shot point blank, thrown from a tree, thrown from a plane, thrown from a hot air balloon, thrown from a mountain, crushed by the Washington Monument, crushed by a foot, executed in an electric chair, shot by a cannon, shot by an arrow, run over by a train, eaten by cannibals, eaten by a whale. That's not all, but you get the idea. So does violence actually sell? Yeah, it does. As does the whimsical and charming comedy behind it. Even if you watch a compilation of Wilkins and Wontkins ads, you will still smile despite quickly knowing what you were in for. For Wilkins, coffee sales soared after the ads started to air. In 1958, they offered a promotion. Send in $1 and a coffee can label, and you could get a set of Wilkins and Wontkins' vinyl puppets. They sold 25,000. That's 25,000 sets of puppets from a local coffee ad. Jim made good money and got national exposure, with clients across the country. Seeds that would help fund future creative endeavors. Jim and Jane founded Muppets Inc. in 1958 and went on to make ads starring Wilkins and Wontkins for Community Coffee, Nash's Coffee, Red Diamond Coffee, Tasty Bread, and Frank's Beverages, among others. In 2021, the Wilkins coffee ads were rediscovered and went viral. Their short, snappy vignettes seemingly made for passing around via social media. But I wondered how the spots hold up under today's advertising standards. So I reached out to Dan Viens at the advertising agency Wieden & Kennedy to get a modern perspective on this decades-old media. Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Dan, I wanted to have you on because you are an ad man. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. I am a creative director at Wieden & Kennedy in Portland, which is, to this day, it's the biggest independent ad agency on the planet. You and your listeners would probably know it from all of the Nike advertising we created over the years. Our founder, Dan Wieden, wrote the tagline, "Just Do It." And we've kind of exploded across the world from there. So I've been there for 15 years, and I love it.
Being an ad man, I mean, it's just like Mad Men, right? Like, this is what I imagine it
It's
is.
exactly like It's
Yeah.
exactly like Mad Men. It's 10:23 on the West Coast right now, and I'm 3 martinis deep because that's my
Sure.
responsibility as an advertising creative. Um, yeah, it's there are still some similarities to Mad Men. I mean, it's sharing big ideas. It's working really closely with clients. It's trying to create work that gets famous. It's trying to create work that becomes something that we all see in our homes or experience on our phones. It's trying to create something that gets made fun of on Saturday Night Live and becomes a real part of culture.
Oh, nice. Is that like a pinnacle is to get on Saturday Night Live?
It definitely is. I mean, I think if you make something that's on the Super Bowl, if you make something that like a really interesting celebrity actually shares or talks about without being paid for it, or if you make something that gets made fun of on Saturday Night Live, then that's certainly a big moment in your career.
We're going to head back in time a little bit to around 1957 when TV ads were a little bit different. They were a lot more simple. We're here to talk about Wilkins and Wontkins, which are they aren't the first Muppets, but they are two of the very early Muppets. And I thought maybe I would just get your impressions of them.
It's so fun to talk about this because I can't remember if I had ever seen them before you shared them with me. And so I watched a whole bunch of them. I watched like a 15-minute supercut on YouTube of all these 10-second clips. And so, they're simply made and they're black and white and it's just two characters. But there is so much about what they're doing that is actually like very relevant to today. So I think, if you go back in time, it's a really simple strategy. It's a strategy by a local coffee company in like the DC area to kind of just get the name of the coffee brand in people's minds, to take these 10-second hits on television and just hear Watkins, just think about Watkins coffee, right? Um, and I think that it goes back to an era that's like not too far removed from radio advertising, like really simple brand recognition, brand name. Just remember the brand name so that when you go shop, you remember it and you think about it. And that's the coffee can you grab off the shelf. But I think if you look at it, it's actually really interesting because it's these 10-second hits. And if one of the things that's changed dramatically about advertising over the last 20 years is the introduction of short form videos, short form content. So whether that's a little while back on Vine or now on Instagram Reels or now on TikTok, the idea of creating these characters that have these short, hilarious vignettes that land on the product name or the brand name is actually quite relevant to how people create work today. So I thought it was really interesting about that work that was made, 50 years ago.
Actually, in February of 21, for some reason, these started getting shared on Twitter and they went viral. Like they had a resurgence. There was something about them that was just kind of enduring. So you're talking about the 10-second hits. It's actually closer to like 7 to 8 that they do anything because then they have this like 2 seconds where they
Right.
just show the product. So when you are trying to do something in like 8 seconds, are there specific things you are trying to get into that 8 seconds?
Well, yeah, and there's a couple different ways of thinking about that, right? So one is just the like austere brand. We have to get the brand name, we have to get the product name in front of the viewer in the first 3 seconds. And I'm sure there's some people who work in data at all these major platforms and all these media companies who would say you've got to have something in the first like 15 frames that lets people know it's an ad for whatever company. So there's kind of that element to it. You want to hook the viewer, you want to draw them in. The big difference, obviously, between when these ads were running decades ago and now is these ads were on television. So people were sat down on the television. The people watching them didn't have remotes. There was no escape. It was an interruptive thing that was there, a bit of entertainment. And now people can just swipe away. So there's kind of this world of like, make sure people know this is an ad for whatever brand we're working on, Nike, Target, Samsung, whatever it is. The other thing is sort of a comedic principle when you're operating with so little time. And this is something that I think really in sort of modern media came to life in Vine, which is like in 6 seconds, you basically have enough time to set something up and then knock it down. Like when you're talking about comedy, it's like you have time to like bring out the cannon and then you have time to fire the cannon. So it's you have time to so you find out whether the Muppet likes the coffee or not, and then punish him. So I think that's kind of what you have, and I think that's why people like these so much. Is like in that 7 seconds before you see the coffee can, you experience this whole story, which is basically two beats. Do you like the coffee? No, you're punished. And I think that's kind of like what you have in there. And then of course you're right. You have that final 2 to 3 seconds where it's Watkins coffee and it's the coffee can and you know what
Wilkins.
you're going to grab when. Yeah, sorry, Wilkins. It's Wilkins coffee. So like when you go to when you go to the grocery store, it's like there's Wilkins coffee on the shelf, and you know exactly which can to buy.
How do you feel about the design of the puppets?
Well, I think like the design of the puppets it's funny because it feels really rudimentary. It
Mm.
feels really simple. It feels almost sort of like it's not quite a person, it's not quite a blob. They're these funny little things. And I think that's part of what makes it surprising, right? And so, I don't know what programs those Wilkins ads would have been on, but like all of a sudden, if you're watching the news or you're watching something like Gunsmoke or who knows what was on, and then these two little characters come on, it really breaks the pattern of what you're doing, which is another principle of advertising. Like you don't want to sort of like have people being lulled into sleep and not perk up and look at your ad, And so if you think about that principle over the years, that can come to life with um, a needle drop piece of music where all of a sudden it's like, wait, what is this music on? Why is this on? And you might be washing the dishes and you turn and you look at it, or it's a really surprising visual so that you kind of look up and you're surprised at what you see, or something really unexpected. And I think this is an example of something that is really unexpected, and sort of the silliness of these things make it so it's clearly these really fun characters that feel very different from anything else that was probably on television at the time. And I think, to some extent, there's a little bit of, subconscious element there that like, you want to be memorable and you want to feel different as a brand or as a company. So it sparks something different in your recognition and your pattern recognition. And then hopefully, in the same way, it sparks something different when you're walking down the coffee aisle.
Yeah, it seems like at the time, a lot of the ads were just, you show the product and then there's like a voiceover, like, here is soap and it gets you clean. Like there wasn't necessarily this playful aspect that I think is much more common today.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think the coffee advertising back then probably guaranteed something. There's the guarantee, like in doing a little bit of research, it's kind of like, they were targeting women who were running the household. And it was like, making that coffee for your husband, or for men, a specific sort of manliness of making the coffee. And so it was kind of coming with like a guarantee, or it was coming with sort of, the role of kind of, sort of like an aspirational utility of what it could do in your life. So I think that's part of the Wilkins strategy was like, let's try to do something different. They sort of saw what Jim Henson was doing in local television. And so that's kind of how they connected with him. But I think it really came down to like, we need to do something different to get attention. And I think that's kind of how they did it.
I'm curious about standards. So in the torture of Wontkins, there's a lot of different methods used, including shooting him point blank, chopping his head off with a guillotine, putting him through a saw, dropping him out of a plane. And it's funny today, you'll hear people say that, oh, when did the Muppets get so violent? And you're like, well, I mean, if you go all the way back, it's kind of in the origins. I'm just curious if are all of those things, or I guess, what do you consider when you're putting together an ad? Are there certain things that you can do with a puppet or animation that you can't do with a human? Would it be still acceptable to have two, well-known characters being shown during daytime television, one of them just shoot the other in the head? Like, what are some of the things that you would consider, and would they hold up today?
I think there's two parts to that answer, and you touched on one of them. It's undoubtedly true that you can do different things with characters and puppets and animation that you can't do in live action. And so I think that violence is certainly one of them. Hyperbole is another one of them. And even a level of silliness. There's a really famous Nike campaign that's just called Puppets. And it was puppets of LeBron James and Kobe Bryant. And they were voiced by Keenan Thompson and David Allen Greer. And, it's Kobe and LeBron kind of hanging out, poking fun at each other. And of course, like the athletes approved it, you know, but there's no world in which Kobe and LeBron were going to get into a fun apartment like they were roommates and poke fun at each other. And so that's kind of a humorous take on it, but it's definitely true that you can operate in sort of worlds with puppets that is far sillier, where the violence doesn't feel grave or real. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels more connected to what someone was probably seeing with eventually with Warner Brothers cartoons or the Three Stooges or things like that. So I think that type of silly violence was common, in those old Three Stooges things and stuff like that. So there's no doubt that you could kind of get away with those things. And then culturally, we're phenomenally different, and from when these ads were running, So yeah, like violence is not acceptable at all in those kinds of ways. So there's really no world in the work that I do where violence is something that our brands or clients feel comfortable putting out there. And so, it's got to be some kind of incredible dark humor, maybe connected to genre or horror or something like that, versus just that one character is shooting another one or chopping the other one's head off.
Are there completely off limit things like you don't do guns? You wouldn't do a electric chair. Like I mean, you wouldn't tar and feather someone. I don't know. Or is it certain types of violence are okay? Push someone off a tree. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Like there's certainly guardrails but again, like you're right. There's a world where like animation allows for that. There's a world where even now, like puppets would allow for that, and it comes down to hyperbole. And so I think now, because of sort of the cultural understanding of warfare and guns in the United States, there are very few mainstream clients who would feel comfortable featuring anything like that in their work. And so some examples where you might have it would be, if Call of Duty is doing a campaign, like of course there's going to be battles there and things like that, but they're going to show it in gameplay. They're not really going to take that leap right now. Clients don't want to create a campaign that's going to spark controversy, that's going to be seen as insensitive, that's going to, has potential to have violence in it. And then the major news story of that day is, what's happening now in the wars that are going on, or with, for a campaign to launch and there's school shootings. So like they don't want to have that kind of work in the world and in those moments. So, I think when you look at this, you're looking at more of like, with Wilkins and Wontkins, you're looking at more of like the Tom and Jerry aspect of things, more of this like very silly Tom and Jerry, Three Stooges kind of character violence that I think was more prevalent then, and I think you might see more in animated shows now.
It seems like there's kind of a line to walk then, because you wouldn't mind having something be edgy and get attention, and like you said, make it on SNL where you're not having to pay for it and it's still being promoted essentially, but you don't want it to get on there because it, I don't know, evokes war or evokes something kind of off limits in modern culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what you want is you want something that connects really well to the way people think and behave now. I think like you want to, like, the ideal scenario, I think, for brands to go viral in a way that they're happy with, is to show up and say something about culture or add something to culture that is really poignant, really thoughtful, hopefully very funny, but illuminates something the way a great comedian does that the viewer hasn't quite thought of, or skewers an idea that people haven't sort of seen in that way. So yeah, like edgy is a tough one. You look at there's brands like the water brand Liquid Death. They're like a heavy metal water brand, and they do wild out there stuff, so that they can, so that they break through. And they've created this really fun brand that goes all the way to their packaging. From the interviews that I've seen and read about, it's like they wanted to have a can that looked cool in your hand when you're at a hardcore show, when you're at a show. And so it kind of starts there, and then you kind of gather attention that way. So a lot of times it just really has to do with like the authenticity of the brand and like what the brand is and what it stands for, and can you entertain people in a way that connects to what your brand's about or what your brands offer, and so that's sort of that's the line everyone walks. No, there's very few bands that feel comfortable being edgy for edgy's sake, because that typically runs out. Like brands are much more focused now on building something sustainable that people kind of understand in different ways, when it comes into market, so that they can say, okay, like, yeah, that's a Nike thing. It might not look exactly like the last Nike thing I saw, but it's got the sort of idea of human potential. It's got the idea of overcoming odds. It's got the idea of, like, being the best version of yourself, even if this one's about this athlete or this one's about this sport, and this one has humor and this one has drama. It's still kind of coming from the same well. So that's what brands are looking for as they develop their brand and their work.
I'm curious if you consider ads in art form.
I think ads are definitely an art form. The way that I think about it is like there might be more of ads than anything else, right? There are so many now, like than any other sort of media format. There are so many, across the world on all the different platforms, and they are seen as very utilitarian. Often it's all about optimizing. It's all about getting, showing the product, getting the price, things like that. But there is a small number of places in the world that really sweat these things that are forgettable to most people. That you're going to walk down the street in New York today and you're going to be bombarded by ads, but you've trained your brain to just basically not see most of them. So there's a great history of wonderful ads that have been made that say something great, that are really funny and have sort of added to the canon of pop culture. And so there's no doubt that great ads are an art form, and that, anything, when cared about deeply and really crafted, is an art form. And I think that there's great ads out there that do that. So many great filmmakers, so many great cinematographers, got their start in advertising. Like Alejandro Inarritu, directed ads. The cinematographer who's nominated for Train Dreams, I worked with on a Corona campaign a few years ago. So it's like there's really talented people writing, producing, ads around the world, all the way back to Jim Henson. So it's this great testing ground for the kind of culture that becomes the underpinning of pop culture. And so, yeah, I definitely believe it's an art form.
If someone came to you at Wyden and Kennedy and was like, I have this great idea for a coffee ad, and showed you Wontkins and Wilkins now, what do you think you would do with that? Do you think, is there a way that you would change it up? How would it be kind of received?
It's a great question. I think one thing that's really changed over the years is all of the brands that we work on at Wyden and Kennedy, like, there's an incredible amount of work on strategy, brand strategy, like who you're talking to, what the brand stands for, what's happening in the people's lives that you're trying to reach. And so these characters don't have much to do with the coffee, right? It's like one likes it, one doesn't. And the one that likes it is really committed to punishing the one who doesn't like it. So I think the first question would be like, okay, how do we figure out what these mean for the brand? Take one of the most famous Apple campaigns ever, Mac versus PC. It's a very similar campaign. It's two characters standing in front of a white site, basically no background, and one is sort of the stiff, boring Windows person, and the other is kind of the younger, hipper, more creative, more independent person that stands for Apple. So I think that's probably some of the work that would be done if someone brought Wilkins and Wonkins to me now. Like, you would start to figure out, okay, like, well, how do I find a way for this person just to, exemplify a bit about the coffee? Like, you would do a little bit of work there. But you wouldn't want to strain greatly. You'd want to kind of keep the entertainment value and keep them keep them kind of what they are for this format. And I think you'd be looking at, okay, who is the audience for this thing? Like who are the people who are really going to like this? Is it, is it young people who are kind of out on their own for the first time and don't have a lot of money for coffee and things like that? So I think it would be that kind of work that people would try to figure out now, um, to make these characters work.
Did these ads make you laugh?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're hilarious. They're hilarious now. I'm not surprised that they sort of went kind of viral recently. And a lot of stuff does that now. We live in this world where time doesn't matter, and old songs can bubble up on TikTok or streaming, And so yeah, I think they're genuinely funny. But they're also hilarious for the time. I mean, it's hard not to laugh knowing the history of like, okay, here's this, Jim Henson in his early 20s for this local brand. But yeah, like I think the simplicity and the silliness of this are still very funny.
Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you would want to mention?
Yeah, I just want to look something up really quick. There's a really good modern example of, I think it's called Life ID, Life 360 maybe. Yeah, okay. So Life 360 is a really good example of like modern advertising that uses like some kind of macabre, violent moments. And a group of friends of mine who used to work at Wyden and Kennedy made it. And the idea here is like, it's being able to like, be aware of where your family is and things like that. And so one of the insights is like, I think of you dying. Like it's the idea of a parent every time like their kid is out in the world, that like they think the worst and they show it. And that's part of the principle of these ads is they show limbs being cut off. They show all these crazy things, but it is an animation. So
Mm.
I think some of the principles of, maybe you call it shock or surprise, or just deviating from the pattern of what you expect to see in a brand, like it's still happening out there. And the tactics of animation and the tactics of using characters and puppets like that really make it possible. And so it's still happening, 60 years later, 50 years later.
Do you think puppets are still, do you think people still connect with puppets now that even though they have all the AI, they've got all this other stuff? Like, is there something about those practical arts that still connect with people?
I think practical arts connect with people undoubtedly and will forever. You're right. We're inundated by digital media produced often now with AI. And I think people find plenty of that entertaining and funny, and plenty of it being sort of slop, low effort, not interesting. I think the internet still rewards ambition. And I think when people see that someone has put work into crafting a puppet and crafting a little world, I think you see in these ads, it doesn't have to be the Muppet show where it's a giant set. But I think now people see when someone crafts something special in their home and post it on social media, or if or certainly a brand doing something like this, I think people still really enjoy puppets and a kind of homemade feeling, or crafted by hands entertainment. I don't think that will ever change.
Oh, I think all the puppet people will be very glad to hear that.
Yeah, people love that. People love seeing like because I think when you see a puppet, there's this is my opinion. I think two things happen. One is you kind of forget it's a puppet, right? You sort of like you're just drawn into these, big eyes or funny shape or wild hair or incredible fur. But once you're older than 9, you at some point you remember that somebody crafted that. You remember that somebody made that, whether it's this intricate hair, whether it's the person who's crouching down, the puppeteering, so I think like that is never going to go away. It's certainly in great competition with the world of digitally produced media, but I think people will forever be delighted by that kind of craft and entertainment.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today to share all your expertise and ideas about Wilkins and Wontkins.
Wilkins and Wontkins, what a duo! I'm so happy you called me. I'm happy to come back and talk about any Puppeteers ads for the rest of our lives.
Sweet. I'll try to come up with many.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. This was really nice of you to do. I appreciate it. And I mean, I feel like I learned something. This is a really good talk for me about ads and all these things I didn't think about before. So it's really nice.
I know the coffee brand doesn't exist, and that I called it Watkins once or twice. So I'm sorry for saying Watkins to anybody who is the heir to the Wilkins coffee brand. And
I think what you proved is that Jim Henson was not successful in his ad campaigns. You don't remember the name of the...
Well, I'm not from the DC area.
That's true. That's true.
70 Years, 70 Muppets, More Muppets Please is a Muppet fan podcast presented by ToughPigs.com. Hosted by a myriad of people and edited by them as well. Produced by Joe Hennis. The Muppets 70 logo is used with permission by the Muppet Studio, with thanks to Danny Iglesias, Frank Reifschneider, and Lee Slaughter. Don't forget to follow ToughPigs.com on all social media platforms, and you can support us by heading to patreon.com/toughpigs or by buying merchandise at tpublic.com/toughpigs.